I always had a bit of an issue with Lore Olympus that I couldn't quite put my finger to. It was something to do with the overall tone of the series and the matter of morality in Lore Olympus world. Especially after watching HAZBIN Hotel yesterday, that I got finally hooked into, I realized that there is a huge problem with inconsistent tone of the whole story in Lore Olympus. It kind of raised the questions about how the setting affects the morality of the story. I've been thinking about it a lot yesterday, and I found a comment that perfectly encapsulates that issue, and here it is. The issue with Lore Olympus's morality is that it tries to put the characters into situations of absurdism that would be generally acceptable or otherwise considered trivial in a setting about all-powerful Greek gods, while also trying to grandstand and make a point about those same moral problems. I'm not going to read the whole comment because it's quite long, so if you want to give it a read, just post the video. But I wanted to read another excerpt from it. Lore Olympus is trying to be both and failing horribly. It's trying to have an absurd, outside human perception of morality stuff while also trying to put the gods on the same level as humans with their interpersonal issues. It's just not working, and it creates a lot of double standards in the narrative. It also makes characters like Persephone look really stupid and irresponsible. It creates all sorts of these tonally dissonant problems in the narrative. It just goes to show how hard Rachel's trying to pay lip service to the very real issues while having her cake and eating it too of the over-the-top god contexts. So what are those double standards that the comment speaks about? And that bothered me so much. To answer this question, we first need to go back to the original mythology. In original myths, gods were pretty much human. They had very human-like personalities, but also they were quite depraved humans, if that. They did a lot of really horrible stuff that mortals wouldn't get away with. They also quite often give in to the lowest impulses of humans. They're cheating, they're jealous, they're violent, they're nasty for no reason, they're very petty. There are a lot of situations where gods turn on mortals for stupidest reasons, such as Psyche being named as a person who is prettier than Aphrodite, and that causes her an outburst, and the whole Eros and Psyche situation happens. So when we were first introduced to the gods in Lore Olympus, they were pretty much aligned with the original counterparts. There were a few minor changes, but generally the spirit of these characters was kind of preserved. The quirks of the gods were kind of translated in a way that it still made them faithful to their originals. When we were first introduced to the relationship of Zeus and Hera, we learned that he's a massive cheater. He instigates many affairs. In the mythology, Hera was cheated on by Zeus a lot of times under different forms and different obscure circumstances that would be worth to make another video of, because some of these are so ridiculous. But anyways, it was kind of like a toxic relationship that we see at the beginning of the Lore Olympus story. He likes to have affairs with mortals and nymphs and whatever walks, Hera's mother, yikes. Anyways, he is pretty much portrayed like his original counterpart was. He is an unfaithful husband. And Hera is this kind of a vicious type of, vengeful woman in the original mythology that quite often punishes mistresses of Zeus in horrible ways for having an affair with her husband. Anyways, she is also portrayed just as in the mythology as a scorned woman who is very angry at him for his infidelity. She is very jealous of these women, especially when it comes to his affair with, what's her name? You know who I mean, Memphi's friend. Oh my god, Thetis, of course, Thetis. Anyways, sorry. So he has an affair with her, and Hera is pretty much, she is scorned. She is angry at him for that. When we are first introduced to Aphrodite, we see that she's very petty, she's obsessed with her beauty, she is treating a passive comment about her being less pretty than Persephone as a biggest insult that kind of pushes her to arrange this weird kidnapping, which gets brushed off too easily, in my opinion, especially after other things that happen in Lord Olympus, but I digress. And then we have Hades, whose portrayal is kind of also aligned with the original myths. He's a bit of recluse. He is kind of, detached from the whole Olympus because his main realm is underworld. And we see that too. We see Demeter, which arguably gets the biggest changes introduced to her character, such as being overprotective parent and a helicopter parent or whatever, when in the original mythos she was kind of more like a caring parent, and she gets villainized in the story quite a lot. But apart from her, pretty much on the first glance, we had these gods aligned with what the original mythos was portraying them as. And the whole world building was also kind of reflecting that. We had a monarchy with Zeus on the very top. We are told that whatever he says goes. He can marry off any goddess to any god. He can make any arrangements he wants. He is a king, and a king of the kings. But then we kind of entered this weird era where we started to get very much into this area of modern sensitivities. I don't know even how to voice it honestly, but the whole kind of tone changed in the series. It seems to me that at the beginning the story was pretty much detached from the morality of the modern world. We had this setting with gods and mortals and everything in between, such as nymphs and other creatures. And the way the story set up the rules in Lord Olympus, it seems to me that a lot of these characters and the relationships appear to be dysfunctional to begin with. And it was a setting that we were introduced to and we were familiar with, and all of a sudden we were taken out of that setting and we started discussing therapy talk, the value of consent, and all of this other stuff that, is obviously important, but it just didn't fit the overall theme of the story. It's like, I would go to Cannibal Town in HAZBIN Hotel and start discussing the morality of eating meat, It just doesn't fit the theme, if you know what I mean. It creates this weird double standard that I'm just really confused about. It feels like the story started off pretty much like HAZBIN Hotel. I don't mean plot-wise, but I mean kind of setting-wise. We had similar settings when it comes to, the supernatural otherworld, the how do you call it? Afterlife, yeah, afterlife. So both of these things are portrayed in the series, in Lord Olympus and in HAZBIN Hotel. But in HAZBIN Hotel, it is logically consistent. The characters are sinners, they're not portrayed to be good. I mean, they are kind of, because we see through the flaws. And we can deduct the flaws and kind of balance these characters out to say, okay, this person is definitely better than this person. But they don't shy away from showing us the nasty side of these characters. And it's aligned with dysfunctional tone of the whole story. We're supposed to see through the dysfunction to get to the core of the person, right? And this is how the Lord Olympus started off. It was showing very dysfunctional characters, and we were supposed to, dissect the good out of these characters. But then at some point, it just decided that it's gonna introduce modern sensitivities to the story, and we kind of are invited to see the story through this lens, but at the same time, the lens doesn't fit. You know what I mean? And what makes it even more interesting is that if you look at Lord Olympus and HAZBIN Hotel, the morality is kind of malleable in a way, because we are talking about immortal beings, and that introduces a different level of a moral code. We understand the moral code for humans, for mortal creatures, but because these are gods or these are immortal and immoral creatures, we kind of have to have a code introduced to us in which we are determining the way we are supposed to be looking at these characters. So, for example, I don't think any of the stuff that happened in the HAZBIN Hotel would work as well if that would be a story about humans. These are sinners, so technically they are ex-humans type of thing. But I don't know if in a normal world where there will be a village full of cannibals, for example, and you wanted to recruit them to your army, all of this stuff, or, the killings for fun and things like that, that wouldn't fly, I think. I think it's because there's this supernatural element introduced to the story. We are kind of suspending our disbelief a bit more, if you know what I mean. And in Lore Olympus, it was like that at the beginning, but then we kind of got jammed with the modern world and in general, like human world rules and morality, sensitivities, however you want to call it. And it just doesn't fit. Because either you start from that point or you just don't introduce it. Because if you start off of that point of showing dysfunction and framing it as something normal in the God's world, but then all of a sudden you change your tune and starting this old therapy talk and everything, these things are gonna clash. These two ideas. And I think this is what happened in Lore Olympus, and this is why I couldn't feel serious about certain things that were happening in the story, because those same things happened before and they were framed as something totally different, which makes it really kind of hard to follow, to be honest with you. How are we supposed to care for mortals, for example, if we're constantly being shown that they are abused, but then after we just see Persephone being, this savior that wants to create this Elysium, and all of a sudden we're supposed to care about mortals. But we were told that, they are used as targets in a shooting game between Artemis and Apollo, and it's not being held to the same moral standard. How are we supposed to look at the fact that Hades took an eye from the paparazzi who took Persephone's picture? How are we supposed to get over that fact and just brush it off just like Persephone did? When, it's very moral. I mean, honestly, let's just apply for a second moral sensitivities to the fact that Hades took away that eye. Do you think that will fly? I seriously doubt it. But we are just, conveniently asked to erase it from our memory, and all of the other things like enslaving shades and other stuff that Hades does because he's the main protagonist. We have a situation with the children, and this is like the biggest one for me. The story involves a lot of trigger warnings that speak on child abuse and things like that, but at the same time it shows children drinking alcohol and preparing alcohol for their parents because there happen to be cupbearers, and it's never portrayed as bad parenting. But at the same time, we are being told that Minfei's mother is the worst ever for throwing parties and neglecting her. If you apply moral sensitivities to any of the characters in Lore Olympus, you would see that they are really messed up. Eros, who got Persephone drunk and dumped her in a car. What was that all about? Are we supposed to apply modern sensitivities to that act? Are we supposed to, embellish the fact that Hera was basically threatening to turn Minfei into a hideous beast with rotting flesh if Hades fancied it or whatever? Are we supposed to conveniently forget the fact that Hades has a lot of shades that were enslaved for absolute centuries before Persephone came over and created the whole Elysium idea or whatever? If we apply modern sensitivities to that, it just doesn't work. Or how are we supposed to apply modern sensitivities to the fact that she accidentally caused genocide? And also certain type of behavior is framed differently when it comes to different characters. We see Zeus cheating on Hera, and it's obviously portrayed as a bad thing, but when we see Hera cheating on Zeus, it's not really portrayed as a bad thing, it's just portrayed as a kind of retaliation. We see Nymph being portrayed as this materialistic being, and she's all this, nasty and whatever, but at the same time, we are seeing Persephone actually accepting gifts from Hades, going on to shopping sprees with him, and it's not even portrayed or framed as something negative. We have the whole Thanatos thing where he accuses Hades of a preferential treatment that he gives Persephone. If we apply modern sensitivities, it is actually true that she did receive special treatment. She was totally unqualified for that job. How are we supposed to care about Minfei slapping Hades when we saw Hecate doing the same thing to him episodes earlier? It just creates this weird tonal whiplash, to be honest with you. How all of this became so, goody two shoes nice and everything, when we started off with all of the bunch of these assholes that were absolutely nasty to one another, and we just treated it as a lore because that's how Greek gods are generally portrayed in mythology. They're quite low sometimes, And if Rachel went full on into these personas of gods that are quite, vengeful, ruthless, like their original counterparts, it would make better sense story-wise because they were introduced in such a way. But we get to see them doing some nasty stuff, and instead of it being portrayed as nasty stuff, but it's just done by gods, so we kind of suspend our disbelief. So we are like, okay, these are gods, so we need to apply a different moral code to them. We are still kind of expected to understand them afterwards, and they're being framed as these tragic characters, such as Hades, for example, which is arguably one of the worst characters in the whole lore Olympus if you look at it at the face value. He enslaves shades, he is very nasty to Demeter for no apparent reason, he literally hits on 19-year-old, being himself 1,000 whatever years old, I don't quite know the number, but he is basically called an old man by at least 2 characters in the story, and it's not something that is being brushed under the rug, it's actually being talked about, and then it gets brushed under the rug when they eventually get together. But generally it starts off as something that is kind of immoral, but then all of the characters conveniently forget about the moral aspect of it. We have him, taking the eye of the paparazzi. We have him threatening a lot of kind of employees and quote unquote lower beings in Lore Olympus. And he's not portrayed to be super nice. He's, first scene we see him in, when he's interacting with Persephone, he actually tries to sleep with her. And listen, if you wanted to have a redemption arc, that's fine. You can do it. But there was no redemption arc. It was literally like he fell in love, he introduced this pink thing into his life, and that pink thing decided to change certain things around in Underworld, so he agreed, but he didn't agree out of a change of heart. He agreed because she wanted it, and he's the provider, right? And he just does whatever she wants. I don't know. Honestly, you can't have those 2 things at the same time. You can't have morally ambiguous characters. It's not even morally ambiguous. They are doing some vile acts, but because they are held to a different standard, because they are gods, they're kind of turning into ambiguous characters. But at the same time, you want to apply modern sensitivities to them, right? Like, we're expecting to be sympathetic towards Hades, where, his ends are far from clean. And I was okay with his character. Honestly, I was even okay with him taking that eye, because it kind of aligned with his Dark Lord persona. But then we are basically invited to see him in a different lens, and we are seeing him through the lens of the modern kind of moral code, and we just get excuses, and we're supposed to be behind this character. We're using the same moral compass. If you apply to other actions of this character, he is literally damned. He is too far gone to be forgiven or excused, especially when he doesn't even seek forgiveness and he doesn't even acknowledge his wrongdoings in the first place. Why do we even like dysfunctional characters or anti-heroes in the first place? Like, what is the appeal of these characters? Because if you look at the face value are the characters in, for example, HAZBIN Hotel, these are really, really flawed people. These are people with a lot of dark past. But we like them because we see that despite these flaws, there's good in them. And we can kind of see it through the vulnerable situations they are being put in. And we kind of start to empathize with them. And we hope that they reach the position where they are happy. But if you apply a modern morality or modern sensitivity to, for example, a character of Angel Dust from HAZBIN Hotel, like on the face value, if somebody would just give you a quick synopsis of that character, would you even like this person? Probably not. But because you see that person through their personal experience that is being presented to you, you start to relate to the certain bits of this character, to the certain anguish of this character. And you start rooting for him. And it's like, how are you supposed to do that in Lore Olympus if there is not one consistent way of looking at things? And I think personally, if Rachel stuck to the original tone, the story would be probably much better. Because we see the world of Lore Olympus through the lens of the main protagonist, which is Persephone, and we kind of see her holding a higher moral stance than the rest of the Olympians, at least at the beginning of the story, sort of. She's portrayed as this good person who cares about shades, for example, and gives away coins and things like that, something that not a lot of gods would do. I think I could argue that none of them would, and nobody showed interest before. So it's kind of like, you have this world and you have a fresh perspective on this world, and it would be kind of fun to watch her just, for example, growing older and grappling with the fact that she lives in a monarchy setting where she could just be given away to any gods at any given moment by Zeus. I think the lesson to be taken from this, it's sort of a storytelling lesson, is that you need to really remain consistent in your tone, unless you kind of want it for it to be intentional, that you have this shift, but there needs to be an event that kind of causes it, you know what I mean? So for example, in Lore Olympus, if the whole setting would be, oh yeah, this is a monarchy, this is kind of a very rigid society where gods can do whatever they want and everybody else is below them, and then Persephone comes into that world and starts challenging the existing forces, and she tries to kind of create a democracy out of the monarchy, and we have that kind of a clash, and then we could introduce those moral, sensitivities to the story, because that would be kind of aligned with the plot. But then the whole monarchy thing also started to be really inconsistent in a moment where we saw Apollo coming to power in the recent chapters, because we see his posters all over Olympus, and it's almost like he's kind of a candidate to be a president or something. He's kind of framed it that way, like he's trying to gain trust and he's trying to gain support from the community. But how is that supposed to hold together with the whole idea of monarchy and the hereditary nature of monarchy? It just doesn't make any sense. And there's a lot of things like that, and I feel, honestly, with the story wrapping next month, I don't think that we will have enough time for these issues to be fixed. So I think it's just going to remain like this, and I just want to talk about the bits just to share my thoughts, because it was bothering me yesterday a lot, especially after watching HAZBIN Hotel and kind of comparing the two, because the setting is so similar that these stories kind of echo each other in a way. I don't know if echo is the right word. Maybe it's like more like they're kind of placed in a similar setting. So it is kind of, for me at least, it was a bit of a natural thing to start comparing the two. HAZBIN Hotel really made a good impression on me. I think the story is great. There were little bits and bobs that were a bit inconsistent, but apart from that, I mean, honestly, I'm really into it. I binged it yesterday and I watched it all. Maybe I'll release a video about it in the future. And why it worked in HAZBIN Hotel? It worked because there was not a tonal shift throughout the whole story. Obviously, we seen Charlie being this kind of a Disney princess type of character that she believes in people and in their good hearts, and she kind of changes a few hearts, which changes the dynamic between the characters. So there is a bit of a shift, I guess, but it's more relational. It's not like the tone of the story changed at any point. It just remains the same from the beginning till the end. It's just that the characters change within that setting, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for watching, and if you liked it, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I wish you a very good week, and I'll speak to you later. Bye!